New York 8, 3 million inhabitants, 32,000 streets, 5 boroughs, 3 rivers, which altogether make up one city unlike any other on the planet. What's all the more remarkable is that when you stop to consider what makes the city so recognizable today, whether it be the iconic skyline, famous cultural offerings, or the energy of its streets, you realize that virtually everything that makes New York so renowned the world over simply did not exist even as little as a century ago. That is because much of the city's history has been shaped by constant evolution, development, and renewal, which has transformed New York unimaginably over the years. But how did the city, which started off as a small outpost for European traders just over 400 years ago, evolve into the sprawling megametropole that it is today? This is how New York became the world's greatest music city long before the bustling streets and towering skyscrapers of modern-day New York. The area was full of dense forests, flowing rivers, and abundant wildlife. The land itself was home to groups of Algonquian-speaking Native American tribes, chief amongst which were the Lari people, who lived in harmony with nature, hunting, fishing, and cultivating the land in an undisturbed manner for some 8,000 years, until the arrival of the first Europeans. The European exploration and colonization of the Americas began in earnest at the outset of the 16th century as navigators from nations like Spain, France, and the Netherlands sought out new trade routes to these newly discovered and resource-R territories. In 1524, the Italian explorer Giovanni da Verrazzano, sailing under the flag of France, became the first European to set eyes on the shores of what would one day become New York Harbor. Verrazzano claimed the area in the name of France. Although any attempt to follow this up with colonial settlement failed to materialize, it would be almost another 100 years before Europeans would return to the area, and it would be the Dutch who would ultimately leave the first lasting impression on what would eventually become New York City. In 1609, the English explorer Henry Hudson, who was in the employ of the Dutch East India Company, had been tasked with finding the elusive Northwest Passage purported to connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Whilst on this expedition, Hudson sailed up the northern river of New York Harbor, which now bears his name in honor of his discovery. He claimed the land on either side on behalf of the Dutch Republic, and in the process established a foothold for future Dutch settlement and trade in the region. The following decades saw Dutch trading posts established along the banks of the Hudson River, as well as others dotted along the coastline stretching from the Delaware River to Cape Cod, which formed the wider territorial claims of the Dutch colony of New Netherland. Initially, these isolated dwellings and their occupants were focused entirely on the commerce produced by the fur trade. But in 1624, the Dutch West India Company decided to send a ship full of colonists to established permanent civilian settlements in the region. They first landed on what is now Governor's Island, but were then dispersed amongst the chosen sites for settlement across New Netherland. A small group were disembarked on the southern tip of Manhattan after it was decided to construct a fortification there to protect the entrance to the Hudson River and the valuable carros of the fur trade, which passed upon on it with that the foundations of Fort Amsterdam were laid out in 1625, and it quickly formed the epicenter of a new settlement which sprung up around it. New Amsterdam was born, and so too were the beginnings of New York City. Just to quickly pause for a moment and let you know that making these videos involves a lot of work on our side, from researching script writing and animation to editing and final composition. Although this is very much a passion project and something we truly love doing, it can, like any kind of work or aspect of modern life, take its toll on our mental health. There have been times when the pressure of meeting deadlines, the stress of ensuring the quality of our content, and the constant need to be creative have left us feeling overwhelmed and mentally drained. It's during these moments that we realize the importance of prioritizing our mental well-being and seeking support when needed, just like how we put in hours of effort to create the best possible content for our viewers. It's equally important to invest time and energy in taking care of our mental health, whether it's taking breaks when needed, practicing self-care, or reaching out for professional help. We've learned that addressing our mental health is crucial for both our personal and professional lives. That's where BetterHelp Today's paid partner comes in. BetterHelp is an online therapy platform that makes starting therapy easier and much less intimidating. With BetterHelp, you can have therapy sessions as a phone call, video chat, or even messaging, whatever is the most comfortable version of therapy for you. They can match you with one of over 1,000 credentialed therapists in their network based on your needs, preferences, and location, giving you access to a wider range of expertise that may be available in your city. If you feel like your therapist isn't a great fit, you can switch therapists with a click of a button in your settings at no additional cost. Join over 4 million people who've used BetterHelp to start living a healthier, happier life. Go to BetterHelp.com. This is history, or select This is History at sign up for a special discount of your first month of therapy in the following year of 1626, with the hope of legitimizing their claim to the new colony. The Director General of New Netherland, Peter Mint, purchased the land of Manhattan from a small band of local LARP Indians in exchange for traded goods worth 60 guilders, roughly $1,000 in today's money. From here, the colony began to grow, and under Minuit's successor, Peter Styres, its population reached some 1,500 people by the year 1655. However, Styres was widely disliked by the settlers for the policies that he introduced. These included regulations on alcohol sales, attempts to assert control over the Dutch Reformed Church, and the blocking of other religious groups such as Quakers, Jews, and Lutherans from establishing places of worship in the colony. The Dutch West India Company attempted to intervene by introducing more lenient policies and reform. However, these plans were quickly interrupted by the outbreak of war in the latter half of the 17th century. The Netherlands was locked in a fierce rivalry with England to become the uncontested maritime and commercial superpower of the age between 1652 and 1673. A series of 3 conflicts known as the Anglo-Dutch Wars saw Dutch and English fleets battle it out on the high seas for naval supremacy. It was against this backdrop in 1653 that the inhabitants of New Amsterdam decided to construct a defensive wall along the northern boundary of the settlement, modern-day Wall Street, to protect against potential attacks by English forces coming overland from Nieuwland, England to the north. Nevertheless, despite their best efforts to deter any would-be attacker, in 1664, the English sent a small fleet to wrest the entire colony of New Netherland and its capital of New Amsterdam from Dutch control. Styres was unable to cool on any resistance and consequently surrendered the city without a fight. The English renamed Fort Amsterdam as Fort James and the wider colony of New Netherland, as well as the actual of New Amsterdam itself as New York, in honor of James, the Duke of York, who would later become the future King James II. New York briefly fell under Dutch control again in 1673, but was quickly returned to the English under the Treaty of Westminster in 1674, which ended the series of hostilities between the two nations. Under English rule, New York continued to grow and prosper, fueled by a thriving economy and a steady influx of immigrants arriving from Europe. The city, however, retained many of its citizens' institutions and practices that were introduced by the Dutch, including the institution of slavery, which had become embedded in New York's economy through the shipment of slaves through the port, so much so that by the 1740s, some 20% of the residents of New York were slaves, totaling about 2,500 people. As the 18th century progressed, New York emerged as a center of political and cultural change. In the years leading up to the American Revolution, the city served as a hub for the dissent organization called the Sons of Liberty, who targeted the sizable portion of New York's population who were fervent royalists. Similarly, the Stamp Act Congress of 1765 was convened in New York to unite the American colonies in opposition to the Stamp Act introduced by the British government. This articulated the grievances and taxation rights of the 30 colonies, which ultimately laid the ideological framework for revolution and the subsequent Declaration of Independence. During the War of Independence, New York City continued to play a pivotal role. Whilst it was initially occupied by the forces of the Continental Army, when war broke out in 1775, the Battle of Long Island, which was fought in August of the following year, saw the American forces under General George Washington suffer a crushing defeat at the hands of the British. The subsequent occupation of New York by British forces would last for the duration of the war, with the city serving as a strategic base for their military operations across the country. By 1783, however, the war was ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris, and the British began to evacuate their forces from the city, bringing an end to nearly a decade of occupation, which resulted in New York emerging as a shining light of liberty in the new American nation. In January 1785, New York was chosen to be the new national capital and played host to some of the most important events in the nation's early